The Empress demanded a duel to the death. The human caught her blade mid-swing. The observation deck of Ethelgard Station stretched like a cathedral of glass and steel, suspended in the void between two empires that had spent 17 years trying to annihilate each other. Theodore stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the distant shimmer of the Xandari fleet, 300 warships arranged in a formation that resembled a blooming flower made of death. Intimidating, isn't it? Admiral Arthur's voice carried the rasp of a man who'd breathed too much recycled air and seen too many friends die. He moved to stand beside Theodore, his weathered face reflected in the viewport like a ghost superimposed over the stars. "It's meant to be," Theodore replied. His eyes tracked the micro-adjustments in the fleet's positioning, the way the outer petals rotated in a pattern that would collapse into a kill sphere in under 40 seconds. "They're showing us they could end this station with a thought. And we're showing them we're stupid enough to walk into the lion's den anyway." Arthur's jaw worked around something bitter. "You sure about this, Theo? The Xandari don't negotiate. They dictate terms written in blood and call it philosophy." Theodore's fingers flexed behind his back, a subtle movement that activated the microservos woven into his gloves. The reinforced polymer felt warm against his skin, hungry for impact. "The blood truth," he said quietly. "Everything proven through kinetic force. Words are wind, only action reveals reality." "Barbaric." "Effective." Theodore turned from the viewport, and Arthur caught the predatory shift in his posture, the way this diplomat carried himself like a weapon in a fancy suit. "We've lost 4 colonies, Arthur. They've lost 6. The math doesn't favor either side anymore. Even barbarism needs economic viability." Arthur grunted. "And if the Empress decides your blood looks better on her sword than your signature on a treaty?" Theodore's smile was cold and precise. "Then I'll make sure mine isn't the only blood spilled." The Admiral studied him for a long moment, recognition flickering in his war-worn eyes. "Christ, Command didn't send a negotiator. They sent a fucking Callows." "Command sent what the situation required." Theodore adjusted his cufflinks, innocent gestures that seated the weighted cores properly in his sleeves. "The Xandari respect strength, so we'll give them strength wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. The day Callows operatives start calling assassination diplomatic courtesy, we've lost more than the war." But Arthur's protest was half-hearted. They both knew the truth. Peace was just another battlefield, and Theodore had been trained to win on every terrain. A chime echoed through the observation deck, 3 ascending notes that made Arthur's hand drift toward his sidearm. Through the far entrance, a delegation emerged in a formation that spoke of military precision disguised as ceremony. And at its center walked Empress Vesper of the Xandari Empire. Theodore had reviewed every intelligence file, studied every holographic recording, memorized every tactical assessment of the woman who had personally commanded the assault on Kepler 442b. None of it had prepared him for the reality of her presence. She moved like liquid violence, each step a calculated assertion of dominance, her silver hair swaying with hypnotic rhythm. The bioluminescent circuitry that marked her skin pulsed in soft turquoise waves, tracing patterns that seemed to shift and reform with her mood. Her gown was the color of deep space, threaded with what looked like captured starlight, cut to reveal the glowing marks that spiraled down her throat and disappeared beneath the fabric. But it was her eyes that caught him, pale violet and sharp as shattered glass, scanning the observation deck with the same tactical precision he'd employed moments before. When those eyes found his, Theodore felt the temperature drop. "Lead negotiator Theodore of the Terran hegemony." Her voice carried an accent that turned human syllables into something musical and dangerous. "How compact your delegation is." Arthur bristled, but Theodore placed a hand on the Admiral's shoulder, gentle pressure that communicated volumes. "Empress Vesper, your reputation precedes you." "As does yours." She glided forward, her entourage maintaining perfect formation behind her. Theodore recognized the hawk-faced woman to her left, High Justiciar Kira, whose traditionalist rhetoric had been intercepted in dozens of military communications. On Vesper's right stood a massive warrior in ornate armor, his hand never straying far from the plasma hilt at his belt. Guard Captain Arlo, if the intelligence was accurate. Vesper stopped 3 meters away, close enough to be conversational, far enough to draw weapons if needed. I confess surprise that the hegemony sent someone so. Her glowing marks flickered as she searched for the word. Young. I confess surprise that the Empire sent someone so willing to negotiate at all. Theodore kept his tone light, but his weight shifted imperceptibly onto the balls of his feet. The blood truth doesn't typically accommodate compromise. The blood truth accommodates reality. Vesper's smile was sharp enough to cut. And the reality is that 17 years of war have proven neither side can claim absolute victory. But, she raised one elegant hand, and her circuitry blazed brighter. The blood truth still demands its due. My generals, my justiciars, my people, they require proof that this peace is earned, not surrendered. Arthur's hand was definitely on his sidearm now. What are you proposing? Kira stepped forward, her deep violet skin marked with more elaborate circuitry than even the Empress. The ritual of kinetic resolution. Single combat between representatives of each side. First blood drawn seals the treaty's terms. Winner's faction receives territorial advantage in the neutral zones. You want us to fight for peace? Arthur's voice dripped with contempt. That's insane. That's Xandari, Theodore murmured. His mind was already calculating angles, measuring distances, cataloging the subtle shifts in Vesper's stance that suggested combat training. And if we refuse? Vesper's expression didn't change, but her circuitry dimmed slightly. Then we return to our fleets and resume the war. The blood truth will be satisfied either way, through honorable contest or continued conflict. She paused. Your choice, negotiator. Theodore looked at Arthur, saw the protest building in the old soldier's eyes. But Arthur had commanded fleets, not dirty operations in stations where rules bent until they broke. He didn't understand that sometimes peace required the same skills as war. I accept, Theodore said. The observation deck went silent. Even Vesper's entourage seemed surprised. You accept? Vesper tilted her head, her silver hair cascading over one shoulder. You understand that this is ritual combat against the Empress of the Xandari Empire. I have trained in the kinetic arts since I could walk. I have killed challengers who studied for decades. I understand perfectly. Theodore began removing his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. Beneath, his shirt was tailored to accommodate the high-tensile weave built into the fabric, protection disguised as fashion. When do we begin? Kira's expression was triumphant. Immediately, the arena sanctum has been prepared on Deck 7. Arthur grabbed Theodore's arm. This is suicide. Let me. No, Theodore's voice was soft but absolute. This is what I'm here for, Arthur. Trust me. The Admiral's grip tightened for a moment, then released. God help us, I do. That's what scares me. As the delegations moved toward the arena sanctum, Theodore caught Vesper watching him with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity, wasn't quite respect. Something else, something that suggested she recognized the careful control in his movements, the coiled readiness that never quite relaxed. You're not afraid, she observed as they walked side by side, their respective entourages maintaining careful distance. Should I be? Yes, her circuitry pulsed in a pattern that might have been amusement. Most species have the good sense to fear death. Theodore smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the faint scars on his knuckles as he flexed his hands. Most species haven't spent years learning that death is just another negotiation. Vesper's step faltered for just a fraction of a second. What are you? What the situation required, Theodore replied, echoing his earlier words to Arthur. Just like you, Empress. Her violet eyes narrowed, and for the first time since entering the station, Vesper felt something she hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. The arena sanctum was less a room and more a statement about Xandari philosophy made manifest in architecture. The circular chamber spanned 50 meters, its floor composed of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Bioluminescent lines carved into the walls pulsed in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat, casting the space in shifting turquoise and violet shadows. At the center, two circles overlapped, one marked in crimson, one in gold. The killing ground, where the blood truth would be proven. Theodore stood at the edge of the crimson circle, methodically removing his cufflinks and rolling up his sleeves. His forearms bore the faint scars Arthur had noticed, white lines that told stories to anyone trained to read combat wounds. Knife defense, close quarters grappling. The kind of marks you earned when fighting wasn't a ritual but a survival imperative. Across the arena, Vesper had shed her starlight gown for something more practical, a bodysuit of midnight blue that seemed to merge with her skin at the edges, its surface rippling with the same bioluminescent circuitry. In her hand, she held a blade that made Arthur suck in a sharp breath. A Xandari plasma edge weapon that existed in a quantum state between solid matter and pure energy. The blade was the length of Vesper's arm, its edge shimmering with barely contained violence. In Xandari hands, it could carve through starship hull plating like tissue paper. "That's not first blood," Arthur protested from the observation ring above the arena. "That's a fucking execution." Kira's voice echoed from the opposite side of the ring. "The ritual demands no restrictions on weaponry. The blood truth cares only for what is proven, not how it is proven." Theodore finished rolling his sleeves, then reached into his pocket. What he withdrew made Vesper's eyes widen fractionally. A pair of gloves, seemingly ordinary except for the way they caught the light. As he pulled them on, the material seemed to drink the arena's bioluminescence, turning from gray to something darker, something that suggested contained potential. "Reinforced palms and knuckles," Theodore explained, flexing his fingers experimentally. "Layered composite of carbon nanotube weave and impact-reactive polymer. The hegemony's answer to species that think biological enhancement is the only path to strength." He looked up, meeting Vesper's gaze across the killing ground. "We prefer engineering." "Gloves," Vesper said slowly, "against a plasma blade." "The blood truth cares only for what is proven," Theodore quoted back at her, "not how it is proven." A sound rippled through the Xandari entourage, something between a laugh and a growl of approval. Even Arlo, the stoic guard captain, nodded slightly. Kira raised her hands, and the bioluminescent lines in the walls flared brighter. "The ritual of kinetic resolution begins when both combatants enter the circles. It ends when first blood is drawn, or when one combatant yields, or," her eyes glittered, "when one no longer draws breath. These terms are witnessed by the blood truth itself." Theodore stepped into the crimson circle. Vesper entered the gold. The arena's lighting shifted, the overlapping section where gold met crimson blazed white, so bright it hurt to watch. Theodore's vision adjusted quickly, the genetic modifications that had made him callous kicking in to compensate. He'd spent 3 years in the program, learning to turn his body into a precision instrument. Every reaction time shortened, every muscle fiber optimized, every tactical instinct honed until it operated below conscious thought. But as Vesper moved, Theodore realized he might have underestimated exactly what trained in the kinetic arts since childhood meant. She was fast, inhumanly, impossibly fast. The Xerath became a blur of plasma and metal, cutting through the space where Theodore's throat had been a microsecond before. He felt the heat of its passage, smelled ozone and burning air, and knew with absolute certainty that his first assessment had been correct. This wasn't ritual. This was execution dressed in ceremony. Theodore twisted, using his momentum to roll away from the follow-up strike that carved a glowing line in the black stone floor. His mind cataloged the information. She telegraphed slightly with her left shoulder before high attacks, probably a training artifact from whatever master taught her. The blade's plasma edge extends 3 centimeters beyond the visible boundary. Heat shimmer gives it away. She's testing my reactions, seeing if I'm just lucky or actually trained. Time to show her it wasn't luck. Vesper pressed her advantage, the Xerath singing as it cut through the air in a complex pattern designed to overwhelm and disorient. Theodore read each strike's trajectory, his body responding with the fluid economy of motion that had cost him 3 broken ribs and a shattered collarbone to learn. He was inside her reach now, too close for the blade's edge, but not close enough to strike. "You're fast," Vesper acknowledged, her voice carrying no breathlessness despite the explosive speed of her assault. "For a human." "You're predictable," Theodore replied, watching her circuitry flare indignantly. "For an Empress." She struck then, not with the blade but with her free hand, a palm strike aimed at his sternum that would have collapsed his chest cavity if it connected. Theodore caught her wrist, feeling the strength in it, the coiled power that came from muscles evolved in higher gravity, and understood viscerally why the Xandari considered themselves the apex species. But apex predators rarely faced prey that thought like predators. Theodore used her momentum against her, twisting her wrist in a joint lock that would have broken a human arm. Vesper hissed, the first sound of discomfort she'd made, and the Zareth came up in a desperate arc meant to bisect him from hip to shoulder. He caught the blade. The arena went silent. Theodore's reinforced gloves blazed with heat as the plasma edge bit into the composite material, molecules screaming as they sacrificed themselves to dissipate the impossible energy. Smoke rose from his palms. The smell of burning polymer filled the air, but the blade stopped. For 3 impossible seconds, Theodore held the Zareth immobile, his arms trembling with effort, his gloves beginning to fail at the molecular level. He could see Vesper's face frozen in shock, her violet eyes wide, her circuitry blazing so bright it cast hard shadows across the arena floor. Then he twisted. The motion was pure Kalos technique, using the opponent's weapon as a lever, redirecting force rather than opposing it. The Zareth tore from Vesper's grip, spinning through the air in a graceful arc before embedding itself in the arena floor 10 meters away, its plasma edge sputtering and dying. Vesper stared at her empty hand, then at Theodore, then at the gloves that were still smoking, the composite material slewing off in blackened fragments. "Impossible," she whispered. Theodore's response was to step forward, closing the distance she'd been so carefully maintaining. Without her blade, without her reach advantage, they were simply 2 fighters standing in a circle of light. "The blood truth," Theodore said quietly, "doesn't care about impossible." What happened next would be analyzed by Xandari historians for decades. Vesper attacked with everything she had, strikes that blurred the line between martial art and murder, each blow capable of shattering bone, each movement flowing into the next with the kind of seamless brutality that could only come from a lifetime of training. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. She was desperate. Theodore met her fury with something that looked almost like serenity. Each strike he redirected rather than blocked, using minimal force to maximum effect. When she threw a hook that could have decapitated him, he guided it past his jaw and replied with a palm strike to her solar plexus, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to send a message. "I could hurt you, but I'm choosing not to." The realization seemed to infuriate her more than any wound. Her circuitry blazed nova bright, and Theodore caught a glimpse of what the Xandari called the war state, a metabolic shift that turned their already impressive physical capabilities into something transcendent. Vesper's speed doubled. Her strength tripled. And Theodore stopped fighting back. He moved purely defensively now, his body a study in conservation of motion, evading and redirecting with mechanical precision. Every dodge by millimeters, every deflection using her momentum against her. He was making her burn through the war state's limited duration, and from the growing fury in her eyes, she knew it. "Fight me," she snarled, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of barely controlled rage. "I am fighting you." Theodore caught her wrist again, held it just long enough to meet her eyes. "But I don't need to hurt you to win." That's when she made her mistake. Vesper overextended on a spinning kick meant to take his head off his shoulders, and Theodore was there, not where she expected him to be, but where the momentum of her attack was always going to leave her vulnerable. He moved with the same explosive speed that had defined the early fight, but this time he was attacking, not defending. The strike was textbook Kalos, open palm to the center of mass, transferring kinetic energy through the target rather than into it. The technique was designed to incapacitate without permanent damage, to prove superiority without requiring death. Vesper flew backward, the air driven from her lungs, her body crashing into the arena floor with enough force to crack the black stone. The bioluminescent lines flickered and died. Theodore stood over her, breathing hard but still standing, his ruined gloves smoking as they finally gave up their integrity and crumbled to ash. His hands beneath were red and blistered. The plasma edge had gotten through more than he'd let on, but he held them steady. "First blood," he said quietly, nodding to the thin line of violet ichor seeping from Vesper's split lip where she'd bitten it during the fall. The arena remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then Arlo's voice rang out, thick with something that might have been awe. "The blood truth is witnessed. The human has proven his worth." But Kira's voice cut through like a knife. "No, the blood truth has been perverted." Theodore turned to see the High Justiciar standing at the edge of the observation ring, her face twisted with fury. He caught the Xerath. No creature without Xandari blood has ever touched a plasma edge and survived. This is not proof of worth. This is proof of heresy. "The rules stated no restrictions on weaponry," Theodore called up, his voice carrying clearly despite his exhaustion. "I used what my species excels at, engineering and adaptation." "You used deception." Kira's circuitry blazed with indignation. "You presented yourself as a diplomat, but you fight like a Xandari warrior. What are you truly?" Theodore opened his mouth to respond, but Vesper's voice stopped him. "He is what his people needed him to be." The Empress rose to her feet with liquid grace, one hand pressed to her ribs where Theodore's strike had landed. Her circuitry had dimmed to a soft pulse, and when she looked at Theodore, there was something new in her violet eyes. "Just as I am what my empire needs me to be." She turned to face Kira. "The blood truth has been satisfied. First blood was drawn. The terms are set." "No." Kira descended from the observation ring, and Theodore noticed for the first time that she wore a ceremonial blade at her hip, not a Xerath, but something older, something that spoke of tradition over practicality. "The blood truth demands clarity, and this result clarifies nothing. A human who fights like Xandari, an Empress who permits such mockery." Her hand moved to her blade. "There is an older law, the binding of blades." Vesper's circuitry flared. "You wouldn't dare." "I invoke it under ancient rite." Kira's voice carried the weight of ritual. "When a kinetic resolution ends without clear victor, when the combat reveals questions rather than answers, the binding of blades may be invoked. Both combatants will remain in the Imperial chambers for 48 hours of true kinetic resolution, without weapons, without armor, without anything but their bodies and their will." Arthur's voice crackled over the arena's comm system. "That's insane. He's injured." "The binding is law," Arlo interrupted, his tone suggesting even he found the situation distasteful. "Ancient law, but law nonetheless. If invoked by a justiciar, not even the Empress can refuse." Theodore looked at Vesper and saw the conflict in her expression, fury at Kira's maneuvering, but something else too. Something that looked almost like anticipation. "The Imperial chambers," Vesper said slowly, "are designed to contain war-state Xandari, reinforced walls, limited access, total isolation." She looked at Theodore. "Are you prepared to spend 2 days locked in a room with me, human, knowing that the blood truth will be watching everything we do to each other?" Theodore met her gaze and saw the challenge there, saw the curiosity, saw something that made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with combat adrenaline. "I didn't come here to do things halfway," he said. Vesper's smile was sharp and dangerous and utterly captivating. "Then let us see what truths your body can prove, Theodore of the Terran hegemony." As the arena's lights rose and guards moved to escort them to the Imperial chambers, Theodore caught Arthur's expression from the observation ring, equal parts horror and resignation. The old soldier mouthed 2 words, "Good luck." Theodore had a feeling he was going to need it. The Imperial chambers were less a room and more a statement about Xandari notions of necessary confinement. The space was circular, approximately 20 meters in diameter, with walls that seemed to shift between metallic surfaces and something more organic, as if the station itself was breathing around them. Bioluminescent veins pulsed in the ceiling, providing light that waxed and waned in rhythm with what Theodore suspected was Vesper's heightened metabolism. 2 alcoves broke the circular symmetry, one containing what might generously be called sleeping platforms, the other holding basic facilities hidden behind a privacy screen that Theodore suspected would do nothing to spare either of them from embarrassment over the next 48 hours. At the center of the room, a holographic display counted down, 47:59, 43. The door sealed with a sound like finality itself. Theodore became acutely aware that he was locked in a reinforced chamber designed to contain beings who could tear through steel with their bare hands, and his only companion was the woman who'd been trying to kill him 10 minutes ago. Said woman was currently standing with her back to the door, her arms crossed, her circuitry pulsing in patterns he was beginning to recognize as deep thought. "Your hands," Vesper said without turning around. Theodore looked down at his palms. The blistering had worsened, angry red welts where the plasma edge had gotten through his glove's protection. They hurt like hell, but he'd learned to compartmentalize pain during his Kalos training. They'll heal. Not if they become infected. Vesper moved to one of the alcoves and retrieved what looked like a medical kit, though the symbols on its surface were Xandari script. Sit. It wasn't a request. Theodore lowered himself onto one of the sleeping platforms, watching as Vesper approached with the medical kit. This close, he could see the individual threads of silver in her hair, could smell something that reminded him of ozone and honey, could count the subtle variations in her bioluminescent markings as they traced the elegant column of her throat. "Give me your hands." He extended them, palms up, and tried not to flinch when her fingers, surprisingly gentle, traced the edges of the burns. Her skin felt warmer than human baseline, and where her fingertips touched, his circuitry flared brighter. "These should have killed you," she murmured, extracting what looked like a salve from the medical kit. "The Zareth's edge burns at 3,000 degrees. Even for milliseconds, that should have cooked the nerves beyond recovery." "Subcutaneous thermal dispersal network," Theodore explained, watching as she applied the salve with careful precision. The relief was immediate. Whatever the compound was, it worked faster than anything in Terran medical arsenals. The same modifications that improved my reaction times also included heat management systems, distributed the thermal load across a larger area. Vesper's eyes flicked up to meet his. "You modified yourself, at the genetic level." "The Xandari weren't the only ones born for war." Theodore kept his voice level. "We were just born softer, slower, weaker, so we fixed it." "Fixed it?" Vesper's laugh was bitter. "You made yourself into weapons. Do you have any idea what you've sacrificed? The Kalos operatives, we know of them. The suicide rates, the psychological fracturing, the way they burn out after 10 years because their bodies can't sustain the modifications." "The Xandari aren't the only ones who understand the blood truth," Theodore countered. "You prove yourselves through strength. We prove ourselves through adaptation. Different paths to the same reality that survival demands sacrifice." Vesper was silent for a moment, her hands still cradling his as she wrapped them in bandages that seemed to adhere and tighten on their own. "In my culture," she said quietly, "there is a saying, the blade that cannot bend will eventually break. We are taught from childhood that rigidity is weakness, that true strength flows like water, adaptive, persistent, inevitable." "Sounds familiar." Theodore watched her work, nodding the care she took with each wrap. "Why are you helping me? We're supposed to be proving something here. Kinetic resolution." "We are proving something." Vesper finished with his hands and sat back, her violet eyes unreadable. "We're proving whether two species who have spent 17 years perfecting the art of killing each other can spend 2 days in the same room without resuming hostilities." She tilted her head. "Unless you'd prefer I resume trying to kill you." "I'd prefer," Theodore said carefully, "to understand what the High Justiciar is really after. That binding of blades, that wasn't about satisfying ritual. That was about putting us somewhere isolated where no one can intervene. Vesper's circuitry dimmed. You noticed. I'm trained to notice when someone's setting a trap. Theodore flexed his bandaged hands experimentally. Whatever the salve was, it was working miracles. The pain had receded to a dull throb. Kira's a traditionalist. She doesn't want peace with humanity. She wants me dead, Vesper finished. Or at least discredited enough that the High Council can replace me with someone more pliable. The Empress rose and began packing, her movements carrying feline grace. The Empire is fracturing, Theodore. 17 years of war have drained our resources, killed our finest warriors, and for what? We control the same systems we did when this started. No strategic advantage, no clear path to victory. So you proposed negotiation. I proposed survival. Vesper's voice carried an edge. But the traditionalists see it as weakness. They believe the blood truth demands we fight until one side is extinct, regardless of the cost. Kira chief among them. Theodore watched her pace, his tactical mind cataloging information. She invoked the binding to create a situation where she can claim you were compromised, spending 2 days alone with an enemy in close quarters without guards, if she spins it right. If she spins it right, she can argue that I've been seduced by human cleverness, that I'm no longer fit to lead. Vesper stopped packing and looked at him. That's why we must ensure nothing inappropriate occurs during these 48 hours. The chamber is monitored. Every word, every gesture will be analyzed by the High Council. Nothing inappropriate, Theodore repeated, while locked in a room designed for kinetic resolution. While maintaining proper diplomatic distance, Vesper corrected, but something flickered in her expression, something that suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as him. The silence stretched between them, thick with implications. Tell me, Vesper said finally, her voice carrying a different quality now. Less Empress, more woman. What made you catch the Zareth? You must have known it would destroy your hands, that it might kill you. Theodore considered his answer carefully. Because in that moment, first blood didn't matter. If I'd let you continue that strike, you would have killed me, treaty or no treaty. And then Arthur would have opened fire on your fleet, and Arlo would have responded, and 2 species would have resumed killing each other because neither could back down. He met her eyes. Someone had to prove that there were options beyond violence. By using violence. By using precision. Theodore stood, moving to stand beside her. They were nearly the same height, he realized. The Xandari averaged taller than humans, but Vesper was on the shorter end of her species' spectrum. I didn't hurt you because I wanted to. I hurt you because it was the only way to stop the fight without either of us dying. Vesper turned to face him fully, and Theodore caught his breath at the intensity in her violet eyes. Do you know what the blood truth really means, human? It's not about violence for violence's sake. It's about forcing reality to reveal itself, stripping away pretense deception, the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. When 2 beings fight, really fight, they can't hide who they truly are. And who am I? Theodore asked. Vesper's hand rose, her fingers hovering millimeters from his chest. You're a weapon who doesn't want to be a weapon, a killer who would rather save lives, a diplomat who fights better than most warriors. Her circuitry flared brighter. You're a contradiction, Theodore, and contradictions fascinate me. What about you? Theodore's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Who is the Empress when she's not performing for her empire? For a moment, he thought she might retreat, might snap back into the role of untouchable sovereign. But instead, Vesper's hand completed its movement, pressing flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Lonely, she admitted. Tired, afraid that peace will be seen as failure and war will be our only legacy. Her eyes searched his face, wondering what it would be like to touch someone without it being a test of strength. Theodore's hand rose, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her cheek. Her skin felt like warm velvet, and the bioluminescent markings pulsed faster under his touch. The monitors, she whispered, but didn't move away. Fuck the monitors, Theodore replied and kissed her. For a heartbeat, Vesper remained frozen, shocked by the audacity, the utter disregard for consequences. Then something broke inside her. some dam that had held back 17 years of war and isolation and the crushing weight of imperial responsibility. She kissed him back with the same intensity she'd brought to their fight, fierce and desperate and hungry. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Theodore wrapped his arms around her waist, feeling the strong muscles beneath the bodysuit, the rapid flutter of her pulse against his bandaged palms. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, both of them trembling with something that had nothing to do with combat adrenaline. "This is insane," Vesper breathed. "Completely," Theodore agreed. "Kira will use this to destroy me." "Probably. We should stop." "Definitely." Neither of them moved apart. Vesper's circuitry was blazing now, casting the chamber in brilliant turquoise light. 47 hours, she said. "We have 47 hours in this chamber. If we do this, if we give in to this, there's no going back. No pretending it didn't happen." Theodore brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. "I didn't catch your plasma blade to be safe, Vesper. I'm not going to start playing it safe now." Her laugh was shaky and genuine and utterly beautiful. "You're going to get us both killed." "Or," Theodore countered, pulling her closer, "I'm going to give two species a reason to choose peace over pride." "How?" "By proving their leaders can fuck across enemy lines. By proving their leaders can see each other as something more than targets." Theodore's tone turned serious. "You said the blood truth reveals reality. Well, here's a reality. I don't see an enemy when I look at you. I see someone who's carrying the same weight I am, someone who wants the same things, someone who's terrified of failing her people." Vesper's eyes glistened. "You barely know me." "I know you well enough. The rest," he smiled. "We have 47 hours to figure out." She kissed him again, softer this time, testing rather than claiming. When they parted, her circuitry had shifted to a gentler rhythm, less war, more wonder. "I should warn you," Vesper murmured, her lips still close enough to his that he could feel her breath. "Xandari mating practices are vigorous." "I should warn you," Theodore replied, his hands sliding down her back to rest at her hips. "Kalos operatives are engineered for endurance." Her laugh was low and promising. "Then perhaps we should test which gives out first, vigor or endurance." Theodore's response was to lift her, and Vesper made a sound of surprise as her legs wrapped around his waist on pure instinct. The bodysuit she wore felt like a second skin under his hands, warm and impossibly smooth. He carried her to the nearest sleeping platform, their lips meeting again and again, each kiss deeper than the last. When he lowered her onto the platform, Vesper's silver hair spread like liquid mercury across the dark surface. Her circuitry pulsed in waves that seemed to synchronize with his racing heartbeat, and Theodore wondered distantly if that was intentional, if her body was literally responding to his presence. "Wait," she said, her hand against his chest, not pushing away but pausing. "I need you to understand something. Among my people, this," she gestured between them, "this is not casual. When Xandari choose a partner, even temporarily, it forms a connection. Our circuitry responds to physical and emotional intimacy. It's why we're so careful about who we allow close." Theodore settled beside her, his weight supported on one arm. "What kind of connection?" "Empathic resonance for the duration of our interaction. I'll feel echoes of what you feel, and you'll see my circuitry respond to everything." Her eyes searched his face. "There's no hiding in Xandari intimacy, no pretending. The blood truth applies here too. Our bodies will reveal everything we're trying to conceal." "Good," Theodore said simply. "I'm tired of hiding." Vesper's breath caught. Then she reached up and pulled him down, and Theodore lost himself in the sensation of her, the heat of her skin, the strength in her arms, the way her circuitry blazed brighter with each touch. He traced the glowing lines down her throat with his lips, felt her arch beneath him, heard her make sounds that had no translation but needed none. His bandaged hands trembled as he found the seam of her bodysuit, and Vesper helped him, the material seeming to peel away like water flowing upward. Beneath, her skin was marked with more circuitry, intricate patterns that swirled across her shoulders, down her spine, across the plane of her stomach. Each mark pulsed with its own rhythm, and as Theodore's fingers traced them, they flared brighter. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Functional," she countered, but her voice shook. "The circuitry regulates our metabolism, our healing, our—" Her words cut off as his mouth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, and the circuitry beneath his lips blazed nova-bright. Theodore felt her hands on his shirt, heard fabric tear as her strength got away from her for a moment. He helped her, shrugging out of the ruined garment, and watched her eyes widen as she took in the evidence of his modifications. The subtle patterns of subdermal reinforcement visible beneath his skin, the faint geometric scars where surgeons had worked their engineering miracles. "You made yourself into art," she whispered, her fingers tracing the lines of enhancement. "Terrible, beautiful art." "We both did," Theodore replied. "Different canvases, same desperation." They came together then with an intensity that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with recognition. Two warriors who had spent years being weapons, finally allowing themselves to be human, to be Xandari, to be simply themselves. Vesper was right about vigor. She moved with the same fluid grace she'd shown in combat, but now channeled into something infinitely more intimate. Her strength was intoxicating, the way she could flip their positions effortlessly, could hold him with a grip that was just short of bruising, could take what she wanted while giving everything in return. But Theodore's endurance proved its worth. When Vesper's war state instincts kicked in and her circuitry flared to blinding brightness, when her strength threatened to overwhelm, he met her with patience and precision, reading her responses, adapting his approach, turning their encounter into a kind of dance where neither led and both followed. Hours blurred together. The countdown on the holographic display ticked away unnoticed. They learned each other's bodies with the same dedication they'd once devoted to learning how to kill, every sensitive spot, every hidden response, every way to make the other gasp or moan or cry out in languages that transcended words. At some point, Theodore noticed that Vesper's circuitry had changed. The harsh, military patterns had softened into something more organic, more flowing. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat, just as she'd warned, but the synchronization went both ways. He could feel the echo of her pleasure, her wonder, her fear that this was too good to last. "I feel you," he whispered against her skin. "Is this what you meant?" "Yes," she breathed. "The resonance, it's stronger than I expected. You're not Xandari, but somehow—" She pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide with realization. "Your modifications, the neural enhancements, they're creating a feedback loop with my circuitry." Theodore could feel it now, a warmth that spread from everywhere they touched, a sense of connection that went deeper than physical. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long war. "Is it supposed to feel like this?" he asked. Vesper's laugh was shaky. "I don't know, I've never, with anyone." She bit her lip. "Xandari Empresses don't take lovers, Theodore. It's considered a security risk, a distraction from duty. I've been alone since my coronation 20 years ago." The confession made something crack open in Theodore's chest. He pulled her close, cradling her against him, feeling her circuitry pulse against his skin. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She pressed a kiss to his collarbone. "I'm not anymore." They lay tangled together as the chamber's lights dimmed through their cycle, mimicking planetary day-night rhythms. Theodore traced idle patterns on Vesper's back, feeling the way her circuitry responded to each touch, a constant conversation between their bodies that required no words. "Tell me about Earth," she said quietly. "Not strategic assessments or military installations. Tell me about the parts worth fighting for." Theodore considered. "There's a place in the Northern Territories, old-growth forest that survived the resource wars. Trees so tall you can't see their tops, and everything smells like rain and green things growing. I went there once between assignments and spent 3 days just walking. No mission, no objectives, just me and the trees and the silence." "It sounds peaceful." "It was. It made me realize how much noise I carried inside my head." Theodore's fingers found a particularly responsive spot on her lower back, and he smiled as her circuitry flared. "What about your homeworld? What's worth preserving?" Vesper was quiet for a long moment. The singing canyons. When the wind moves through them, the rock formations create harmonics that you can feel in your bones. My mother took me there when I was young, before she died in the Kelvar offensive. She said the canyons were proof that beauty could exist without purpose, that not everything needed to be justified by utility or strength. She sounds wise. She would have. Vesper's voice cracked slightly. She would have chosen peace over pride, like I'm trying to do. Theodore tilted her face up to kiss her forehead. You're not just trying, you're succeeding. You brought me here, created the opportunity for this treaty. That takes more courage than any battle. Kira doesn't see it that way. Fuck Kira. Theodore's voice hardened. She's clinging to a philosophy that's killing your people and mine. The blood truth might demand honesty, but it doesn't demand extinction. Vesper's circuitry pulsed in a pattern Theodore was beginning to recognize as agreement. When we leave this chamber, everything changes. You know that, yes. We can't hide what we've done. The monitors will have recorded everything. Let them record. Theodore's jaw set. I'm not ashamed of this, of you. The High Council will see it as manipulation. They'll claim you seduced me to weaken the Empire's position in negotiations. Or, Theodore countered, they'll see that their Empress is strong enough to acknowledge what everyone with eyes already knows, that this war benefits no one, and peace requires us to see each other as something more than enemies. He ran his thumb across her cheekbone, following the circuitry's glow. You said the blood truth reveals reality. Well, here's the reality. I care about you, not as a strategic asset or diplomatic leverage, but as you. That's not weakness. That's the most honest thing either of us has done in years. Vesper's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. You magnificent fool, don't you understand? They'll try to kill us for this. They were going to try anyway. Kira didn't invoke the binding to observe proper ritual. She did it to create an opportunity. Either we'd kill each other, solving her problem cleanly, or we'd. He gestured at their tangled bodies. Well. Or we'd prove we're both unfit to lead. Vesper's circuitry dimmed with resignation. She wins either way. Not if we refuse to play by her rules. Theodore sat up, his tactical mind engaging. What are the actual laws around the binding of blades? Not the intent, but the letter. Vesper propped herself up on one elbow, her silver hair cascading over her shoulder. The binding requires 48 hours of kinetic resolution. At the end, both parties must present themselves to the High Council and declare what truths were revealed. And what constitutes valid truth under Xandari law? Anything proven through direct experience. Anything. Vesper's eyes widened. Anything that withstands cross-examination by the assembled parties. Theodore's smile was sharp. So if we walk out of here united, if we present a coherent argument that peace serves both our people's interests, if we can demonstrate that working together makes us stronger than working apart, the blood truth would support our position because we've lived it. Vesper sat up fully now, her circuitry blazing with excitement. We'd have experiential proof, not just theoretical arguments. The traditionalists hate peace because they believe it's untested, soft thinking. But if we can show that cooperation survived the most intimate possible testing, we turn Kira's trap into our strongest evidence. Theodore reached for his ruined shirt, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged hands. We need to be smart about this, though. When those doors open, every word and gesture will be scrutinized. We need to present this not as romantic weakness, but as strategic evolution. Vesper was already moving, retrieving her bodysuit and resealing it with practiced efficiency. We present it as the next stage of the blood truth. For 17 years, we've tested each other through violence. Now we've tested each other through vulnerability. Both tests matter. Both reveal truth. And we passed both tests. Theodore managed to get his shirt mostly back on, though it hung in tatters. Together. They stood facing each other in the center of the chamber, and Theodore was struck by how different this felt from the arena. There, they'd been enemies performing for an audience. Here, they were allies planning their survival. I need to tell you something, Vesper said, her voice carrying a weight that made Theodore's tactical instincts spike. About Kira's conspiracy. It's worse than just political maneuvering. How much worse? There's a faction within the High Council that wants to resume the war in force. Not just border skirmishes, but a full genocidal push. They believe humanity's rapid adaptation, your Kalos program, your engineering capabilities, represents an existential threat to Xandari supremacy. Her circuitry dimmed. Kira's been in communication with them. I've intercepted fragments of their transmissions. Theodore's blood ran cold. You're talking about extinction-level strategy. I'm talking about people who would rather see both our species destroyed than accept that the universe is big enough for multiple apex predators. Vesper moved to the chamber's wall, pressing her palm against what looked like solid metal. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a small data storage device. I've been gathering evidence, communications, resource allocations, battle plans that only make sense if the goal is total annihilation rather than strategic victory. Why didn't you present this to your council? Because half of them are probably compromised. Vesper's laugh was bitter. The traditionalists have been positioning themselves for years. If I'd revealed the conspiracy prematurely, I'd have been removed on grounds of paranoia or, worse, accused of fabricating evidence to justify capitulation to humanity. Theodore took the data device, his mind racing through implications. So you needed an external catalyst, something undeniable. I needed the war to become obviously unsustainable. I needed my own people to see that continuing down this path leads only to mutual destruction. She met his eyes. And I needed to buy time by appearing to pursue peace through proper channels, negotiation, ritual combat, all the traditional methods, while secretly gathering enough evidence to expose the conspiracy. Using yourself as bait, Theodore said slowly. That's why you accepted the duel, why you didn't object to the binding. You wanted Kira to overextend to make mistakes. I wanted her to reveal herself, Vesper's circuitry pulsed, but I didn't expect this, she gestured between them. I didn't expect you. Theodore moved closer, cupping her face in his bandaged hands. Neither did I, but now that we're here, we use it. Kira thinks she's isolated us, but what she's actually done is given us 48 hours to build an unassailable position. When those doors open, we don't just walk out as treaty negotiators. We walk out as proof that two species can find common ground even in the most hostile circumstances. And then we burn Kira's conspiracy to the ground. Theodore's voice carried the cold precision of a Kalos operative on mission. We present the evidence. We force the High Council to choose between genocidal madness and productive peace, and we dare them to reject the blood truth when it's standing right in front of them. Vesper's smile was fierce and beautiful. You know they'll try to kill us anyway. Almost certainly. And you're willing to risk it. Theodore kissed her, fierce and quick and full of promise. I caught a plasma blade with my bare hands for you. I'm willing to risk a lot more than that. The holographic timer read 31, 42, 17. They spent the next hours preparing. Vesper walked Theodore through the intricacies of Xandari political structure, who owed allegiance to whom, which council members might be swayed by evidence, which were too deeply compromised to trust. Theodore reciprocated with information about the hegemony's internal politics, the faction balance that had made his mission possible, the narrow window of opportunity they were operating within. Between strategy sessions, they stole moments of intimacy, touches that were half comfort, half reminder that they were fighting for something worth preserving. Theodore learned that Vesper's circuitry responded to emotional states as much as physical stimulation, that fear made the patterns contract while hope made them expand. Vesper learned that Theodore's modifications came with a cost, chronic pain in his joints, headaches from the neural enhancements, a lifespan probably shortened by a decade or more. Was it worth it? She asked, tracing the geometric scars on his chest. Ask me again when this is over, Theodore replied. At the 20-hour mark, Finn's voice crackled through the chamber's communication system, technically a violation of the binding's isolation protocols, but the tech specialist had never been particularly concerned with rules. Theodore, can you hear me? I'm routing through a back channel, very illegal. Please don't tell the Admiral. Finn, Theodore moved to the comm panel. Status. Well, The good news is that the hegemony delegation hasn't been arrested or shot. The bad news is that there's a lot of very tense standing around with weapons drawn. Arthur's about 3 seconds from doing something regrettable. Static crackled. Also, there's chatter suggesting the High Council is debating whether to declare the binding null and void due to inappropriate conduct. Which, I assume means they saw the part where you. We get it, Finn. Theodore glanced at Vesper, who looked more resigned than embarrassed. What else? There's movement in the Xandari fleet. Ships repositioning into what Arthur's calling a pre-bombardment configuration. If the Council decides to reject the peace talks entirely, we're looking at immediate resumption of hostilities. Vesper moved to the comm panel. This is Empress Vesper. Can you identify which ships are moving? Why, Your Majesty? Finn's voice climbed an octave. Yes. Primarily the 5th battle group and elements of the 7th. Does that mean something? Vesper's circuitry blazed. Those are Kira's loyalists. She's positioning for a coup. She turned to Theodore. If the Council rejects our treaty, she'll argue that I'm compromised and use military force to remove me. Then she'll have exactly what she wants, an Empress who'll pursue total war. Theodore's mind raced through options, discarding plans as fast as he formulated them. They needed leverage. They needed something that would make attacking the peace talks politically impossible. Finn, can you access the Chamber's monitoring system? I mean, technically it's encrypted with Xandari military grade. Yes, obviously I can access it. What do you need? I need you to broadcast our full conversation from the last 20 hours to every ship in both fleets. Unedited. Complete audio and visual. Silence on the comm. Then, that's insane. That's a massive violation of diplomatic privacy. The hegemony will court-martial you. The Xandari will probably execute both of you for public indecency or whatever laws they have about. Finn, Vesper's voice was calm. Can you do it? Yes, Your Majesty, but I really think you should reconsider. Do it, Theodore and Vesper said simultaneously. On your heads be it, broadcasting in 3, 2, 1. Somewhere in the depths of Ethelgard Station, Finn worked his technical magic. And across 2 fleets comprising thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of personnel, human and Xandari alike, screens flickered to life showing the impossible. An Empress and a Diplomat, a Xandari and a human, 2 enemies discovering they were nothing of the kind. The edited highlights, because even Finn had some sense of decorum, showed the conversation rather than the physical intimacy. But context made everything clear. The laughter, the strategic planning, the moments of vulnerability where ancient enemies became uncertain allies became something indefinable and powerful. Most importantly, it showed the conspiracy evidence. Vesper explaining the genocide faction, Theodore analyzing the implications. 2 people from opposite sides of a war working together to prevent something worse. The effect was immediate and chaotic. The timer read 00:47:23 when the chamber's door chimed. Not the violent breach Theodore had half expected, but a polite request for entry. Vesper and Theodore exchanged glances. They'd prepared as best they could, evidence organized, arguments rehearsed, positions coordinated. But preparation only went so far when facing a power structure that had spent decades perfecting the art of political violence. Open it, Vesper said, her voice carrying imperial command. The door slid open to reveal Arlo, the guard captain, his expression unreadable behind his ceremonial helm. Behind him stood what looked like half the High Council, Kira prominent among them, her face twisted with barely contained fury. Empress, Arlo began, his tone formal. The High Council requests your immediate presence to address. He paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase it. The unprecedented circumstances of your binding. Unprecedented. Kira pushed forward, her circuitry blazing with indignation. That's certainly one way to describe treason, collaboration with the enemy, and the complete abandonment of every principle the blood truth represents. Theodore stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Vesper, a protective gesture that made Arlo's hand drift toward his weapon. Treason! We've spent 48 hours doing exactly what the binding demanded. Kinetic resolution, revealing truth through direct experience. You've spent 48 hours rutting like animals. Kira's voice echoed through the corridor. You've proven nothing except that humans will use any tactic, no matter how depraved, to weaken Xandari resolve. Careful, Justiciar. Vesper's voice dropped to a dangerous register. You're coming very close to accusing your Empress of being weak-willed. I'm accusing you of being compromised. Kira's hand moved to her ceremonial blade, an older, more dangerous gesture than Arlo's caution. The binding was meant to prove through combat whether peace was viable. Instead, you've proven that you value personal pleasure over imperial duty. Actually, Theodore said, his voice carrying the same analytical precision he'd used during countless mission briefings, we've proven something far more valuable. We've proven that two people from species who have spent 17 years perfecting murder can spend 48 hours in close quarters and choose cooperation over conflict. That's not weakness. That's evolution. Evolution? Kira's laugh was sharp. You speak of evolution while our empire stagnates, while our resources drain, while humans like you turn yourself into mockeries of natural life just to compete with your betters. She turned to address the assembled council members. This is what peace looks like. Degradation, compromise, the slow death of everything that makes us Xandari. Then maybe, Vesper said quietly, it's time to question what being Xandari really means. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like tradition has become a suicide pact dressed in philosophy. The council chamber erupted. Some council members shouted support for Kira. Others defended Vesper. Still others called for immediate execution of the human contaminator. The discipline that had defined Xandari political life for centuries fractured along fault lines that had been widening for years. Arlo stepped between the factions, his voice cutting through the chaos. Enough! The blood truth demands order. He turned to Vesper. Your Majesty, you must address the council formally. Present your case. Let the truth prove itself as law demands. Very well. Vesper straightened, and Theodore watched her transform, the vulnerable woman he'd held through the night vanishing behind the mask of imperial authority. But Theodore comes with me. We make our case together or not at all. Absolutely not, Kira began. Are you refusing the Empress? Arlo's question was soft but carried weight. He might be traditionalist, but he was also lawful, and Xandari law gave the Empress certain prerogatives. Kira's jaw worked. This is irregular. This entire situation is irregular, Arlo replied, which is precisely why we should follow established procedure rather than improvising based on emotional responses. He looked at Vesper. The council is assembled in Primary Chamber 7. You have 1 hour to make your case. The human may accompany you as witness and participant in the binding. As they moved through Ethelgard Station's corridors, Theodore noticed the change immediately. Before, station personnel, human and Xandari alike, had moved with careful neutrality, giving both delegations equal space. Now they watched with open fascination, some with horror, others with something that looked almost like hope. Finn's broadcast had worked. Everyone knew. You understand what you've done? Arthur's voice came from an alcove, the Admiral stepping into view with his usual rifle nowhere in sight, probably confiscated when tensions escalated. You've painted a target on both your backs the size of a star system. We've forced the conversation, Theodore countered. No more pretending, no more shadow conflicts. Everything's in the open now. That's what scares me. Arthur looked past Theodore to where Vesper walked with regal precision. Your Majesty, I don't know you, but I know Theo, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. So I'm asking directly, is this real, or is this the longest con in military history? Vesper stopped, turning to face the old soldier. Admiral Arthur, your file indicates you served in the Kepler 442b defense. You were there when my fleet broke your lines. Arthur's expression hardened. I lost 3,000 people that day. Good people. People who trusted me to bring them home. I remember. Vesper's circuitry dimmed. I remember every ship I destroyed, every life I ended. I remember giving the order that killed your people because my duty demanded it. And I remember the moment afterward when I realized that victory felt like ashes because all I'd proven was that I could kill efficiently. She moved closer to Arthur. So to answer your question, yes, this is real, because I'm tired of being the efficient killer, and Theodore gave me hope that there's another way. Arthur studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand, not a salute, but a handshake between equals. Then I suggest you two survive the next hour, because if you don't, we're right back to the killing. The primary Chamber 7 was less a room and more a statement about Xandari governmental philosophy. The circular space was dominated by elevated seats arranged in concentric rings, the outer ring for lesser council members, the inner ring for the High Justiciars, and at the center, a raised throne that currently sat empty. Vesper and Theodore entered to absolute silence. Every seat was filled, every eye tracked them, and in the innermost ring, Kira sat with an expression of triumphant anticipation. Empress Vesper, the council elder began, an ancient Xandari whose circuitry had faded to pale gray with age, but whose voice still carried absolute authority. You stand before the High Council to answer for your conduct during the binding of blades. Present your defense. Vesper moved to the chamber's center, Theodore at her side. Honored council, I present not a defense, but a revelation. For 48 hours, Theodore of the Terran hegemony and I underwent kinetic resolution as law demanded. During that time, we discovered truths that reshape our understanding of this war and our path forward. You discovered that humans are skilled seducers, Kira interjected. This is known. I discovered, Vesper continued, her voice cutting through the interruption, that the blood truth we've built our empire upon is incomplete. We've focused so intently on kinetic force, on physical proof, that we've ignored equally valid forms of testing. Theodore proved his worth in the arena by catching my Zareth, a feat that should have killed him but instead demonstrated the power of human adaptation and engineering. And in the chamber, we proved something more profound, that two people from opposed species can find common ground even in the most intimate circumstances. Intimate, the council elder's tone was unreadable. You acknowledge the physical nature of your interactions. I acknowledge everything. Vesper's circuitry blazed. The blood truth demands honesty, and here is my truth. I chose to be intimate with Theodore because he saw me not as an enemy to be defeated or a prize to be won, but as a person carrying burdens equal to his own. In him, I found understanding that I've never found among my own people, and together, we discovered evidence of a conspiracy that threatens both our species. That got the council's attention. Theodore stepped forward, holding up the data device Vesper had concealed in the chamber. Honored council, this contains communications between High Justiciar Kira and a faction within your government that's been working to ensure peace negotiations fail. Their goal isn't strategic victory, it's total genocide of humanity, regardless of the cost to the Xandari Empire. Lies, Kira snarled. Human manipulation. Present the evidence, the council elder commanded. What followed was brutal in its precision. Communication logs showing Kira coordinating with military commanders to position fleets for devastating first strikes. Resource allocations that only made sense if the goal was prolonged total war. Strategic assessments that dismissed any peace option as weakness to be purged. Most damningly, personal correspondence, where Kira admitted that Vesper's death would be regrettable but necessary for the Empire's purity. The chamber erupted into chaos. This proves nothing. Kira was on her feet now, her circuitry blazing with fury. These documents could be fabricated, human technical capabilities. The encryption keys are yours, Vesper said coldly. The communication protocols are Xandari military standard, unchanged for 2 decades. Unless you're suggesting humans can crack our quantum-encrypted channels, which would itself be admission that we're not the inferior species you claim, this evidence is irrefutable. Then I irrefutably stand by my actions. Kira's hand was on her blade now. Yes, I've worked to prevent this peace. Yes, I've positioned loyal ships to ensure no treaty is signed. Because peace with humanity isn't just tactical error, it's philosophical surrender. We are Xandari. We are Apex. We don't negotiate with prey species who have barely left their cradle world. We left our cradle world 400 years ago, Theodore said quietly. We've colonized 40 systems. We've developed technologies you're still trying to reverse engineer. We've fought you to a standstill for 17 years despite your apex advantages. He looked around the chamber. We're not prey. We're competition. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner we can stop wasting lives proving what's already obvious. Never, Kira drew her blade. Not a Zareth, but something older, ceremonial. The blood truth demands I prove my position. I challenge the Empress to single combat. Here, now, let reality reveal which philosophy deserves to guide our people. The chamber went silent. Arlo stepped forward. Justiciar, you cannot challenge the Empress during a council session. Law prohibits. Law prohibits an Empress from being compromised by enemy influence, Kira countered. But here we are. So I invoke the right of replacement, ancient law that allows a justiciar to challenge leadership that has failed in its duty to protect Xandari supremacy. The council elder looked older than his centuries. The right of replacement has not been invoked in 400 years. Then it's overdue, Kira said. I claim the right. The challenge is issued. Empress Vesper must answer or abdicate. Vesper's circuitry had gone cold and precise, the same pattern Theodore had seen in the arena before their fight. I accept your challenge, Kira, but know this, when I defeat you, your conspiracy dies with your credibility. When I defeat you, Kira replied, the Empire returns to its proper path, and the human contaminator dies with you. Theodore started forward, but Vesper caught his arm. No, this is Xandari law, you can't interfere. The hell I can't. Theodore, she turned to face him, and her eyes were sad and certain. This was always how it would end. Kira was never going to let me negotiate away her war. One of us leaves this chamber and one doesn't. That's the blood truth she's chosen. Then You'll survive. Vesper pulled him close, kissed him hard and fast. You'll take the evidence to your people. You'll make sure someone remembers that we tried, that we came so close. Don't talk like you've already lost. I'm not. Her smile was fierce. I'm talking like someone who's finally found something worth fighting for beyond duty and tradition. And that, my beautiful human, makes me more dangerous than Kira can imagine. The chamber cleared. Arlo drew ceremonial markers on the floor in some luminescent compound, a circle identical to the arena's killing ground, but smaller, more personal. Kira took her position, her blade ready, her circuitry blazing with anticipation. Vesper moved to face her, unarmed. You don't even draw a weapon. Kira's laugh was ugly. You've gone softer than I thought. I don't need a weapon, Vesper replied. Theodore taught me something during our binding. He taught me that the blood truth isn't about force. It's about understanding what you're really fighting for. And I understand now. I'm not fighting for imperial pride or Xandari supremacy. I'm fighting for the possibility that we can be more than just efficient killers. Kira struck without further preamble. The attack was pure Xandari technique, refined over centuries, perfected through thousands of duels, executed with the precision of someone who'd spent decades as a justiciar enforcing law through combat. Her blade traced patterns in the air that spoke of death in a dozen different configurations. Vesper met each strike with bare hands, her circuitry flaring as she moved. But Theodore could see the difference from their fight, where she'd been testing him, searching for weakness. Now she was purely defensive. Kira had the advantage of a weapon, and she was using it. A cut opened on Vesper's forearm, not deep, but enough to draw violet blood. Another on her shoulder. Kira was carving her apart with methodical precision. Theodore's hands clenched, his body screaming at him to intervene, but Arlo stood beside him with a warning look. Interfere, and he'd invalidate Vesper's claim to leadership. This is what peace looks like, Kira crowed, driving Vesper back toward the circle's edge. Weakness, defeat, the strong dominating the soft. This is the blood truth in its purest form. Vesper stumbled, and Kira lunged for the killing blow. But the stumble was faint. Vesper caught the blade, not with reinforced gloves, but with her bare hand wrapped in a torn piece of Theodore's shirt, the high-tensile fabric he'd worn. She twisted exactly as Theodore had taught her, using leverage instead of strength, and Kira's blade clattered across the floor. Then Vesper struck, a perfect palm strike to the center of mass that sent Kira flying backward. The Justiciar crashed to the floor, gasping. "You want to know what I learned from Theodore?" Vesper stood over her fallen opponent. "I learned that there are 1,000 ways to be strong, and clinging to tradition while your empire burns isn't one of them." Kira tried to rise, but Vesper's foot on her chest stopped her. "Yield," Vesper commanded. "Never." "Then die as a traitor." Vesper's voice was ice. "Because that evidence is real, your conspiracy is exposed, and the only question now is whether you face execution or exile." Kira's circuitry flickered and died. "I yield." The council elder rose. "The challenge is decided. The blood truth recognizes Empress Vesper's authority." He looked around the chamber. "And perhaps it's time we recognize that truth has many forms." 3 months later, Theodore stood on Ethelgard Station's observation deck, watching construction crews from both species working together to build what would become the first joint embassy. The Treaty of Kinetic Resolution, named somewhat ironically, had been ratified by both governments. It hadn't been easy. Kira's conspiracy had run deeper than anyone suspected, and rooting it out had required Vesper to make brutal choices. Some council members had been executed, others exiled. The Xandari Empire had nearly fractured. But it had held, barely. Thinking deep thoughts, Vesper's voice came from behind him, and Theodore smiled before turning. She wore a new gown, this one incorporating both Xandari and human design elements, a symbol of the cooperation she championed. Her circuitry pulsed steady and bright. "Thinking how strange it is," Theodore admitted. 3 months ago, I came here expecting to die. Now I'm watching our people build something together." Strange is one word for it. Vesper moved to stand beside him, their hands finding each other automatically, a gesture that still caused scandal among traditionalists but had become oddly popular with younger Xandari. Miraculous is another. "How are the negotiations going?" "Slowly. Arlo's doing well as the new High Justiciar, but there's still resistance." She squeezed his hand. "They want to know when you're returning to Earth." "Arthur keeps asking the same thing." Theodore turned to face her fully. "What do you want?" Vesper's smile was soft and genuine, an expression her people were still getting used to seeing. "I want you to stay. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to teach our people that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites." She paused. "But I won't ask you to give up your life for me." "You're not asking." Theodore pulled her close. "I'm choosing. The hegemony can find new negotiators, but you and we proved something in that chamber, something worth protecting. We proved that even enemies can become lovers. We proved that the blood truth works both ways. Violence reveals one kind of reality, but so does trust, so does intimacy, so does choosing to see someone as a person instead of a target." He kissed her forehead. "We proved that peace isn't weakness. It's the hardest fight there is." Vesper's circuitry blazed bright enough to cast shadows. "Then let's keep fighting it, together." Outside the viewport, human and Xandari crews worked side by side, building something neither could have created alone. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even easy. But it was real, and sometimes, Theodore thought, that was the only truth that mattered. In the distance, both fleets maintained their positions, no longer in attack formations, but not yet standing down completely. Trust, like peace, would take time. But they had time now, and 2 people who'd been willing to risk everything to buy it. "I love you," Theodore said quietly. Vesper's response was to pull him into a kiss that tasted like hope and ozone, and the future they were building together, one impossible choice at a time. When they finally parted, she whispered against his lips, "The blood truth recognizes this as real." Damn right it does, Theodore replied. And somewhere in the depths of space, two empires that had spent 17 years learning to hate each other began the much harder work of learning to trust. It started with an Empress and a Diplomat. It started with a blade caught in desperate hands. It started with the understanding that the strongest weapons were sometimes the ones you chose not to use.